Okay, in today's lesson, we're going to talk about unity and division. Now, you're going to hear about a term called the era of good feelings. You know, everything seems good, at least at the surface. But brewing underneath the surface is going to be division, and that's what we're going to talk about today. Okay, so in 1816, President James Monroe is elected president. And James Monroe is going to be the last of the revolutionary officers, people who actually fought in the Revolutionary War to serve as president. He's old-fashioned. He still wears powdered wigs. Nobody's wearing powdered wigs anymore. He's still wearing kind of these short breeches while everybody else is wearing long trousers. And everybody kind of looks at him as quaint and kind of old-fashioned. Everybody kind of likes him. And he ran a guy against a Federalist who he easily defeats. And that should tell you something about the decline of the Federalist Party. Most people had left the Federalist Party and became Republicans, and James Madison easily wins election to presidency. In fact, he makes a goodwill trip to Massachusetts, kind of the home of the Federalists, where he's meted with cheers and salutations. So you can see that this is going to be a popular president, or at least what most people think is going to be a popular president. This is where we get that era of good feeling, the era of good feeling. In fact, when he runs for re-election, he has no opposition. He's basically going to win his second term without anybody running against him. All right? By that time, by the second election, 1820, the Federalist Party is done. Now, while we have, kind of lost that two-party system, at least for a time, there's no political rivalries going on in the country. We start to have regional rivalries, or sections. And we're going to talk about three very important sectional leaders. Okay, the first guy we're going to talk about is John C. Calhoun, and he represents the South. He's from South Carolina. He is a big supporter of slavery, okay? And he opposes a strong federal government. He believes in strong state governments. Now, John C. Calhoun is a very striking man, very striking features, kind of gaunt face, deep eyes. They call him the young Hercules. He was slim. People kind of really looked up to this guy. But he represents the South and what the South believes in, and that's slavery and strong state governments. The next important figure, he represents the North, and that's Daniel Webster. Daniel Webster. He's also probably the most talented of the orators. He gives great speeches. He opposed slavery. He says slavery is evil. Okay, so he opposes slavery. He had also been an opponent of the War of 1812. Remember, these people up in New England felt that their economic source, their way of making money through trade with Great Britain had been disrupted with this War of 1812. He voted against raising taxes to pay for the war, so he opposed the War of 1812, and he wants the federal government to help build the economy back up. So he believes in a strong federal government. He believes that the economy should be influenced by a federal policy. All right? So you have Daniel Webster representing the North, John C. Calhoun representing the South. But as Americans have begun to move west, we have another sectional leader, Henry Clay. Remember that name. We're going to talk about him a lot. He represents the West. Now, you might remember Henry Clay before, because remember I talked about how Henry Clay, he was a war hawk. He is from Kentucky. He's the one that is kind of the vocal lead of the war hawks. He is the one that had been encouraged war with Great Britain. In fact, he'd said that he can take his Kentucky militiamen up to Canada and basically defeat the British in Canada, and that we could add Canada to the United States. Well, you know how that turned out. Not so much. Okay, but Henry Clay is a big proponent of the people that live west of the Appalachian Mountains. Now, like Daniel Webster, he also supported an active central government. He wants the government to get involved and help build the infrastructure of the West. More roads, more canals, more way to easily transport goods to market. So he wants an active federal government. Okay, after the War of 1812, we have this kind of this growth of the American spirit. First sense of nationalism begins to show, signs of growth. But we are facing severe economic problems. The economy faces, a lot of problems. And it has a lot to do with the Bank of the United States. Now, the Bank of the United States, if you remember, was Hamilton's idea. Well, the charter for this bank ran out in 1811. Kind of bad timing because the War of 1812 happened a year later. So the charter on the Bank of the United States runs out. Now, after the war, there is no federal government to regulate money. So states start to issue money, and they start to issue lots of money. And the problem with that is, if there's lots of money out there, prices tend to go up. And so as prices go up, people have less money to spend on things, which means they don't buy, and the economy takes a hit. All right? Now, by 1816, you have to remember, the Republicans had initially opposed the Bank of the United States, began to realize, something, the Bank of the United States and Alexander Hamilton is right. All right? So they want a second Bank of the United States, which they charter by 1816. And what this national bank is able to do is restore order to the nation's money supply. All right? Another problem facing the economy is foreign goods. With the War of 1812, we weren't getting anything from Great Britain. So American industry grew quickly. I mean, it's great. If we have no competition, everybody has to buy American. So American industry grew quickly. But after the War of 1812, the British are free to start sending stuff. And they're able to send it into the United States cheaper than American goods because, if you remember, their factories are older. Their equipment has been paid off. While American is still building their factories, having to pay for the equipment, pay for the buildings, they can't produce goods as cheap as England. So dozens of businesses failed because of competition with cheap foreign goods. So, like we've seen in the past, Congress decides to get involved. And this is going to please, who? Daniel Webster, and to a certain extent, Henry Clay. They're going to oppose the tariff of 1816. So Congress passes the tariff of 1816. Now, who's going to be upset about this? John Calhoun and the people in the South. Because it made imported goods more expensive than similar priced American goods, or similar American goods. So what happens is, like I've used that example before, a plow. I can buy a plow if I'm a southern farmer from Great Britain, and I might buy it for, who knows, $7. But if we put an import tax on it, it might make that plow $10. Or the American plow might be $9.50. Well, of course, I'm going to buy the American plow, but I'm still having to pay $2.50 more for a plow than I had to before. This looks to the South that the United States federal government is favoring the North. So what you have and what we really need to understand is a word called sectionalism. Sectionalism. Americans still, even though, after the War of 1812, we kind of have this growing sense of patriotism, people still now are seeing themselves associated with sections. I'm a Northerner. I'm a Southerner. I'm a Westerner. All right? And sectionalism really means loyalty to one state or section rather than to the nation as a whole. Now, John C. Calhoun's not going to bend, and Henry Clay doesn't seem to want to bend. Daniel Webster didn't want to bend, but Henry Clay wanted the economic growth for all sections. All right? So he came up with, stand by, the American system. Okay? Now, his plan, he's trying to please everybody, and you know how difficult that is. He called for higher tariffs on import goods to help the northern factories. Okay, so keep those tariffs high to help northern factories. This would give the North money to buy farm products from the South and the West. And this is going to reduce dependency on foreign goods. Okay? Clay wanted Congress then to use that money, that tariff money, because remember, all that taxes as tariff doesn't go to businesses. It goes to the government. Okay? Clay wants Congress to use that tax money to build better transportation systems in the West. More roads, more canals, more things to, maybe more steam boats. All right? Now, here's the problem. This sounds great on paper. The tariffs remained high, but Congress spent little on the internal improvements. All right? Now, the South says, something, we don't need them. We've got great river systems. Our plantations can easily get their products to market easily via rivers and along the coast. So the South isn't too crazy about having the government spend the taxes that they collect off the tariffs on improvements. All right? It sounds great on paper. Not so great in, actual, use. Okay, before we end the section, there's one other thing we need to talk about, and that's the Supreme Court. You're going to see once again where the Supreme Court comes in and strengthens the federal government. And this is a case called McCulloch versus Maryland. All right? And what happened after the Second Bank of the United States was chartered? Okay, they have a branch in Maryland. Maryland wants to tax the federal bank. Hey, it's in our state, it's in our boundaries. We want you to pay taxes, federal government, on your branch. Now, McCulloch is a cashier, chief clerk, I should say, of this bank. Well, he refuses to pay the taxes, so he sues Maryland. And the Supreme Court ruled that states cannot interfere with federal institutions within their own borders. Can't do it. Okay? Federal institutions trump state institutions. Think about it here in Nebraska. Right here in Bellevue, we have Offutt Air Force Base. Could the city of Bellevue or the state of Nebraska tax that? No, it's federal property. So once again, you start to see where the federal government is starting to take more of an important role, that it is the primary source of power in the United States. The states do not have jurisdiction over federal institutions, and the Supreme Court backs us up with the case of McCulloch versus Maryland. More power for the federal government. All right. And that's it for today. We've talked, about the sectional leaders. We talked about kind of the era of good feeling. At the highest level of politics, you start to see, the political parties begin to dissolve, and there is that sense of political oneness. But underlying that is the sense of sectional divisions between the North, the South, and the West. And our three sectional leaders, Daniel Webster in the North, John C. Calhoun in the South, and Henry Clay in the West. They're all going to lead their sections.